Good morning to all who are gathered here in Washington or joining us around the world on our AJC webcast and are waiting impatiently for this moment that we've been waiting for the last year, exactly 5 months today before the US presidential and congressional elections. The question before this House, a question debated over many Seder and Thanksgiving tables in American Jewish homes over the years, is very simply this: who is better for the Jews, the Democrats or the Republicans? Now let's begin with a 5-minute opening statement by Dan Senor for the Republicans. Dan.
Thank you, and thank you for hosting me here today to AJC. Before I start my formal opening, I just would be remiss if I just didn't spend 1 minute making the point that when David Harris first invited me to participate in this debate, there were it was a very dynamic group of Republican candidates running for president. So it was a rather easy invitation to accept because, Dan, would you make the case for the Republicans? We had candidates of, Latinos, blacks, women, men, different generations, governors, senators, very accomplished people from all walks of life. Sure, there was this sort of obscure, quirky reality TV star who was running, but never in a million years that I think I'd have to be defending him. So it was a very, It was a very easy invitation to accept. Now, let me just say things have not gone exactly according to plan. So what I won't be doing in the next 5 minutes, I just want to put this disclaimer out now, what I won't be doing in the next 5 minutes is defending or making the case for Donald Trump, because this Republican is not voting for Donald Trump. The trafficking in racism, the misogyny, the humiliation, and making fun of people with physical disabilities, the proposing a religious test for people entering this country, the threats of using investigative and prosecutorial powers of the federal government against critics, I can go on and on, the embrace of autocrats around the world is just simply unacceptable, and I hope it is a historical anomaly. But I do believe after November, when Donald Trump is decisively defeated in his campaign for president, which I think he will be, and that's just an analytical point. I mean, it's an observation. I do think he will be decisively defeated. After that period, the Republican Party, which I hope to play a role in, will be in the process of a major rebuilding, picking up the pieces and starting anew. And when I think about what that means for the Jews, and I think about the issues that the American Jewish community, diaspora writ large, care about, of course we may differ on domestic policy issues and economic policy issues, but one issue where the Jewish community has historically stood shoulder to shoulder with one another has been in the importance of supporting Israel. And on that issue, the long-term trends for the Republican Party are extremely strong. Support in the long term over the next several decades, I mean, just by every single metric you can look at, is immense. Republicans at every level and every office, at the grassroots and the senior levels, strongly stand with the state of Israel. It's not because they get Jewish votes. It's not really because they get Jewish money. It is because this is something Republicans believe. And what worries me, as someone who believes that support for Israel should be a bipartisan issue, that I cannot say the same in terms of the long-term trends for the Democratic Party. I'm standing here with my friend Steve Israel, who I'm sad to say is retiring from Congress. He is someone who I admire and has been one of the few lone voices in a very tough swamp over the last couple of years, has really stood up and spoken out in the Democratic Party with Israel. He's one of just the 7% of House Democrats that voted against the Iran deal. 7%. of House Democrats. Yes, we can apply them. But the future of the Democratic Party is not being shaped by the people who voted against the Iran deal. Just let me give you one snapshot. It's just happening in real time. The Democratic National Committee has announced the Platform Committee, the committee at the Democratic National Convention that will be establishing the party platform for the next 4 years until the next convention. And for the first time, the likes of the following have been appointed to the committee: Dr. Cornel West, Jim Zogby, Keith Ellison, Barbara Lee. I mean, I can go on and on and on. Just to give you, these are the people who will be shaping the Democratic Party agenda. Jim Zogby has, quote, compared the plight of the Palestinians to that of the Jews during the Holocaust. Jim Zogby, who will be on the Democratic National Committee's Platform Committee, has compared the Israelis to, quote, Nazis. He's called members of Congress who have stood with Israel, Israel firsters, using that old anti-Semitic trope. And he's called the BDS movement legitimate and moral. That's a quote. Cornel West, who is one of the chief academic leaders. I know I had to talk about Trump in the first minute, so I get
giving you back that minute for Trump.
Dr. Cornel West, who's one of the chief architects of the BDS movement at the academic level, has called Israel guilty not just of occupation, not just of humiliation, but more and more every day annihilation. He's compared Israel to apartheid South Africa and said Israel must be brought to its knees. He's called Gaza a concentration camp because of Israel's dealings with the Gaza Strip. He has called the BDS movement, quote, a litmus test for progressives. So I would just wrap up the opening in saying the energy in the Democratic Party today, everywhere in this country where the Democratic Party is strong, it is because there is a liberal progressive energy. And the progressive energy of the Democratic Party believes, as Cornel West says, that standing not with Israel but against Israel, supporting the BDS movement as moral and legitimate is a litmus test. And you are seeing more and more factions of the Democratic Party, unfortunately intimidated by this progressive energy in the Democratic Party and refusing to stand up to it. And that is why I say the long-term trends, while we're going through a difficult period right now in the Republican Party, the long-term trends as it relates to America's relationship with Israel are far stronger in the Republican Party.
Dan, thank you. Now, let's say for 6 minutes, Congressman Steve Israel.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much to American Jewish Committee. I want to acknowledge your president, who is also my favorite constituent, Stanley Bergman, who is here. Now that I'm leaving Congress, I get to tell the truth about a lot of things. When I'm in a meeting on Long Island that I want to end quickly, my technique is to take my cell phone out and say, "Oh, the president is calling." I really mean Stanley Bergman is calling. And Dan Senor. Dan is, by the way, brilliant author. I read his book, Startup Nation, sitting in a lot. It's a magnificent book. I commend it to your attention. I will take 10% of every book sold as a result of this. Look, folks, the subject of this debate is which party is better for the Jews. I want to begin by disputing the notion. Jews do best when both parties are best for the Jews. That's number one. And so if you are an activist Republican in the Jewish community, an activist Democrat in the Jewish community, an activist progressive or conservative, then thank you for your activism, no matter what party you happen to be in. It is a better deal for all of us. I was in Israel in April. I spent 90 minutes with Bibi Netanyahu, and he said then, as he always says, the most important strategic asset that the state of Israel has is bipartisanship in the United States of America, and I completely agree with him. There are, however, some true contrasts, and the reason I'm a Democrat is because of the Democratic Party's support for Israel. But I want a party that supports the Jewish community and doesn't confine its support to Israel, whose support is broad and reflects the values of Tikkun Olam. And so let me give you 5 examples of where I think that contrast is so marked. I choose a political party that is pro-Israel, but is also pro-women's health choices. The Republican Party in the House of Representatives in February of 2015 threatened to shut down the Department of Homeland Security, not because they had a beef with Homeland Security, but because they didn't want a woman to be able to access health care at Planned Parenthood. In 2015, they threatened to shut down the entire federal government over Planned Parenthood. This is not a Republican or two Republicans. This was the position of House Republicans. They now have a special investigative committee that is subpoenaing people who are affiliated with Planned Parenthood. I choose a political party that is pro-Israel and pro-LGBT. On May 26th, 2 weeks ago, the Republicans, the Republican Party in the House of Representatives, brought down an energy and water appropriations bill, defeated it. Why? Because it included one single provision protecting the rights of LGBT employees in the federal government. I choose a party that is pro-Israel and pro-education. Folks, your children, your grandchildren are shouldering a $1.2 trillion debt for college. House Democrats have a plan to allow them to refinance that debt. House Republicans won't allow us to vote on that bill. I choose a program that is a party that is pro-Israel and pro-immigration. We need comprehensive immigration reform. Every Democrat will vote for it. The House Republicans won't even allow us to take a vote. I choose a party that is pro-Israel and pro-gun safety. 2 weeks ago, in the Appropriations Committee on which I serve, every single Republican on that committee, every single one, most of them pro-Israel, voted against Nita Lowey's amendment that simply said this: if you're on the FBI terror watch list, you shouldn't be able to go buy an assault weapon legally. Who could be against that? Every Republican in the House Appropriations Committee. And I support a party, ultimately, that is pro-Israel, but reflects the fundamental value of the Jewish people, and that is tikkun olam, repairing the world. And on the broad range of issues, not just supporting Israel, but supporting the notion of building a better world, I believe that my party is most reflective of the Jewish community's long-term interests. Thank you very much.
Congressman, thank you. Dan, I think you have a right to rebuttal.
Yeah. I respectfully note that Congressman Israel did not actually address the core issue I pointed, which is the vitriol against Israel being directed by the most energetic and fastest growing elements within the Democratic Party. I concede that there are differences, there are disagreements between our parties and within each of our parties about the very issues that Steve mentioned. Look, we can talk about the fact that today in America there are over 40 million Americans on food stamps. And the idea that the Democrats have a monopoly on tikkun olam in terms of getting people out of poverty after a half century of a war on poverty, a war that we have lost under a policy agenda that's been primarily a Democratic policy agenda. We have to have a real debate inside both parties about how to address those issues. We want to talk about education. It's not just higher education. Let's talk about school vouchers. Let's talk about charter schools, which is an important issue for many segments within the Jewish community. Democrats are largely, tragically, silent on that issue. So we can talk about these domestic and economic issues, but the issue of Israel is one issue where the Jewish community has historically stood shoulder to shoulder with one another and with Israel, and as Steve said, across party lines. Now, I cited this platform committee, the committee that is the most anti-Semitic, and let me be clear, the most anti-Semitic committee put forward by a national party in the history of this country. And not a single elected Democrat has spoken out against it. Not a single elected official has said these officials who've been appointed should step down.
Congressman, before you respond, I want to remind those in the audience here to, if you have questions for our debaters, please fill out the card on your seat, pass them forward to staff, and we'll put them into the system. And also, if you're watching us on webcast, tweet to at AJC Global. Thanks very much, Congressman. Please.
Well, thank you. Very briefly, Dan, I actually did criticize and condemn the selection of various people to the Platform Committee, and I know there'll be plenty of time for us to delve into the Platform Committee. And let us just stipulate that as you have repudiated the bigotry and the vulgarity and the inappropriate and obscene views of Donald Trump, who is the head of your party, I will repudiate the comments and the ideology and the philosophy of Cornel West, who is a member of the Platform Committee.
Can I ask?
Rebuttal? Okay, fine.
Not a rebuttal, it's a question. First of all, I applaud you for doing that. I really do. I sincerely think it is important. Can you explain why no one else is doing it? Why?
I don't think you're right.
No. Come on. Where are the Democratic leaders who are saying,
Dan,
this is unacceptable, these individuals need to step down? Why are people so scared in the Democratic leadership to do that?
Well, I'm happy to do that. I now have a minute to respond. I assume there'll be questions about the Platform Committee. I'm perfectly happy to delve into that. I will tell you, however, that you are wrong when you say that Democrats have not responded to it. And I assume that you were also willing to talk about the importance of having Howard Berman on that Platform Committee and the other pro-Israel voices who are on that Platform Committee.
They're a minority.
I think no, they're not a minority. They're not a minority. But we will spend time delving into the Platform Committee because I know that most Americans, like the people in this room, wake up every morning worrying about a Platform Committee and go to bed every night worrying about a Platform Committee. That's what America's really obsessed with right now, the Platform Committee.
Okay, I'm sure there will be a Platform Committee question in the next few minutes. But before we get to that, Dan, after the September 2011 special election to fill Anthony Weiner's House seat in Brooklyn and Queens, an election that was won by Bob Turner, Republican. For the first time, a Republican won that seat in some 80 years, I believe. You wrote in the Wall Street Journal that Jewish voters' perceptions of President Obama as anti-Israel was a decisive factor, and you predicted that it would cost the president in his re-election bid the following year. Well, perhaps it did. From an estimated 74 to 78% of the Jewish vote in 2008, it perhaps fell to around 69%, according to some figures, in 2012. That was a notable fall off. Still, a candidate pummeled day in and day out for being anti-Israel, getting more than 2/3 vote from Jewish voters, does make one wonder how resistant Jewish voters are to change. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely right. I think Jews have voted Democrat overwhelmingly for decades and for generations, and I think it actually makes it all the more impressive and admirable that Republicans expend so much capital and so much energy and so much focus and so much leadership in support of Israel. I mean, there is no political incentive for Republicans to stay. Just step back and think about that. What are the political incentives for Republicans to stand with such unity with the state of Israel? They, as you pointed out, they don't get Jewish votes, and they actually get very few Jewish dollars. So what is the motivation? The motivation is they believe it. These are shared values. These are a real sense of shared principles, and is therefore why, if the Republican National Committee or Republican leaders put forward individuals like Cornel West and Jim Zogby to shape the policy of the party, there would be a revolt in the Republican Party. There would be an absolute revolt against individuals like that having a say. Keith Ellison, put on the Platform Committee, one of Steve Israel's colleagues. During the Gaza war, he voted against increasing funding for Iron Dome. He voted against it. Barbara Lee, chosen to sit on the Platform Committee by the chairman of the Democratic National Committee. Barbara Lee was chosen by Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Barbara Lee refuses to condemn Hamas, refuses to vote for a resolution around the Gaza war that condemned Hamas. If these sorts of individuals were put in charge of shaping policy for the Republican Party, there would be a revolt, because that is what the Republican Party believes. Those are the long-term trends for where Republican principles are and Republican energy for the next several decades. It is a clear contrast with the Democrats.
Congressman, I think you're being asked to defend a couple of your colleagues.
Well, thank you so much for bringing up Anthony Weiner. That's always a pleasure. And I wouldn't argue that
pales in comparison when I got to talk about these
that
days.
special election is indicative or broadly reflective of anything. I don't think that was a referendum on anything other than the subject of a remarkable documentary that just came out, for those of you who haven't seen it. Look, 2 points. Number one, let's stick with the top lines. In 2012, 68% of Jewish voters voted for Barack Obama. Stanley will tell you, and Marion will tell you, I'm a pretty popular member of Congress in my congressional district. It's a very competitive congressional district. It's 50-50. I would die for 68%. 68% is a pretty good indication. I'm a big believer in politics of would I rather be me or them? Would I rather be the Democratic Party, which enjoyed 68% support for Jewish voters, or would I rather be them who say, well, maybe one day we will enjoy that support? And more significantly, more substantively, look, you're going to talk a lot about the platform committee, and I'd do the same thing if I were you. But there is a fundamental difference, ladies and gentlemen, between platform and policy. And so, on what counts, the Democratic Party and Democrats in Congress have stood shoulder to shoulder with Israel. I was just in Israel. I visited Iron Dome installations. I saw the people who are operating David Sling, who are researching and developing Arrow. The fact of the matter is that when it comes to Israel's critical ballistic missile defense programs, it is a Democratic president and Democrats in Congress who have supported and passed that funding with Republicans. With Republicans. When the first missile flew from Gaza by Hamas, I raced to the floor of the House of Representatives. I found the most conservative Republican House member I could find. His name is Tom Cole from Oklahoma. I said, Tom, we ought to do a bipartisan resolution supporting Israel's not right to defend itself, that's silly, its responsibility to defend itself as a sovereign nation. We introduced that bill. Now, Dan knows congressional protocol and procedure. When we introduced that resolution, unequivocally stating Israel's responsibility to defend itself, I was the author and sponsor. So I called it the Israel-Cole Resolution. The pro-Israel community called it the Kol Yisrael Resolution. But, ladies and gentlemen, it passed. And you know how many Democrats voted against it? None. You know how many Republicans voted against it? None. Democrats and Republicans stood together defending and supporting Israel's rights. That's the narrative that we need. It does Israel no good for anybody to say Israel's support is weakening in Congress. First of all, because it's not weakening, and second of all, because that gives aid and comfort to Israel's enemies, true enemies in the Middle East. On funding ballistic missile defense, on military-to-military cooperation, on intelligence cooperation, on passing an amendment that I introduced in the Appropriations Committee providing historic new funding for tunnel detection and exploitation, on the things that matter to Israel's survival as a Jewish state. There is no weakening of Democratic support for Israel. There is nothing but strength of Democrats for Israel, partnered with strength of Republicans for Israel, and that is what is best for Israel.
That was fun. So,
Go ahead, Dan.
can I?
Why not?
I mean, Steve wants, which I would do the same thing if I were him. I would say there's this platform committee over there, but you shouldn't pay attention to it. There's a shiny object over here, which are all the things that he just rattled off. So let's distract from the platform committee. So this platform committee is, by the way, populated not just, as I said, by Cornel West and Jim Zogby, but by his congressional colleagues. Like I said, Keith Ellison, who voted against funding for Iron Dome, is on the platform committee. Carlos Gutierrez is on the platform committee, chosen by Hillary Clinton. On his last trip to Israel, he actually didn't meet with any Jewish officials, no Jewish Israelis. He only met with Israeli Arabs and Palestinians, refused to meet with any Jewish officials. This is who's populating the platform committee. Now, if this platform committee were truly, as Steve says it is, this standalone thing, this island, I would say he has a point, but it's a reflection. It's not a standalone, it's a reflection. I mean, look at this Pew poll that came out, this blue chip, gold, world-class poll that came out this year. When polled about views and opinions on Israel, 75% of those polled by Pew, 75% of Republicans say they sympathize with Israel. Only 43% of Democrats, less than half of Democrats polled by Pew, said that they sympathize with Israel. During the Gaza war, Gallup did a poll. Fewer than half of Democrats polled thought Israel's actions in the Gaza war were justified. If you look at where, as I said, the energy in the Democratic Party, the progressive movement is taking place, they look at college campuses. The BDS movement locks arms with every liberal group on campus, whether it's the climate change group, whether it's Black Lives Matter. These are all groups that have a right to argue for their issues that they're arguing. Some of them I'm even sympathetic to. But the point is, BDS has become such a litmus test issue on the left that all these other groups, Black Lives Matter, climate change, I can go on and on and on, they all now make BDS one of their issues. Black Lives Matter has a program called Ferguson and Gaza, promoting the comparisons as though Black Lives Matter should be standing with the Palestinians in their dispute against Israel, the most radical Palestinians. So this is something that's not just the platform committee is an expression, a reflection, a natural extension of what's going on. But I hope Steve would acknowledge that there's something going on the ground beneath the sort of ground beneath his feet. He's been an important voice, but his voice and the people who share his worldview are shrinking. They are the minority in the party. They are not on the march.
Thank you, Dan. Congressman, by way of response to Dan.
Yeah, thank you.
Before you begin, last year you famously called a colleague of yours, Congressman Steve King of Iowa, Meshuggah, and you said a few other things.
It's a parliamentary term for those of you who don't follow.
When he accused Jewish Democrats of being more loyal to their party than to their people. I think this sort of wraps into what Dan is sort of coming to. Can you respond?
Yeah, I will, but let me take this opportunity to just correct some of the things that Dan said and offer some perspective. First, he said that a platform committee is an expression of your political party. Well, first of all, the platform committee consists of several people. There is only one Republican candidate for president who is an expression of his political party. That candidate, Donald Trump, said on Israel, I have a real question as to whether or not both sides want to make it. A lot will have to do with Israel and whether or not Israel wants to make the deal, whether Israel's willing to sacrifice certain things. That is the Republican candidate for president. He then later said that he wouldn't support a two-state solution, but said that Jewish voters should feel comfortable with him because, quote, I'm a negotiator like you folks. That is the Republican candidate for president. On MSNBC, he said, if I win, I don't want to be in a position where I'm saying to you, and the other side now says, we don't want Trump involved. Let me be sort of a neutral guy. That is the position of the Republican candidate for president. And when Dan says that he disagrees with those positions by his party's nominee for president, presumptive nominee for president, I will agree and say I disagree with those 3 or 4 or 5 people on the platform committee who have views that I don't share. So let's stipulate. You disavow yourself from Trump's comments. I disavow myself from the comments of several members of the platform committee. And finally, you talk about energy, where the energy is in the Democratic Party. Let us not remember that when a Jewish journalist or several Jewish journalists have criticized Donald Trump, we have seen an explosion of energy in social media, invoking imagery of concentration camps to condemn those American Jewish journalists. If that is where Republican energy is, I want nothing to do with it, and I think every Republican should have repudiated it. I haven't heard one House Republican repudiate the use of concentration camp imagery to attack American Jewish journalists on television. So I'm still waiting to hear that.
Look, Steve, you can pull up all the Donald Trump quotes you want. I agree with it. I can pull them up too. Trust me. I'm out there. You know.
I feel your pain.
I'm glad to spend time with you and others. I hope to see as many of you as possible because after November, if Trump gets elected president, I'm going to be sent to the gulag. So I'm
You know, I can get Hillary Clinton to make you an ambassador to a country that's large enough to have a pool.
Right.
That
But again, you look at the Pew poll, you look at the Gallup poll, you look at these numbers. Democrats are in large numbers, the rank and file of the party, are not saying this. Historically, this is not the party of Harry Truman. This is not the party of Scoop Jackson. This is not the party of Steve Israel. In large numbers, for the first time, and it's a trend that's been growing over the last decade, in large numbers, have been actually saying they don't sympathize with Israel. It's not just their leaders, as you and I talked about, not just the people that are being appointed to the platform committee. It's the rank and file members and activists of the party are saying explicitly that they don't sympathize with Israel. So you and I can criticize the things Donald Trump said all day long. And I think once Trump is gone and defeated in November, Trumpism will not live in the Republican Party afterwards. And actually, the strong pro-Israel trends within the Republican Party will continue to grow. If you look at the data, it's simply not the same in the Democratic Party. And I haven't heard Democrats who are pro-Israel lay out a plan for how they're going to address the fact that there is a growing divide within their party. It's not a marginal issue. It's not a secondary, tertiary issue. It's becoming, as Cornel West said, a litmus test issue.
Dan, I just have to respond. Look. Steve King is the Republican Party. Steve King said that people who come to this, to your question, that people who cross the border have muscles the size of cantaloupes from smuggling heroin. That's the face of the Republican Party. The face of the Republican Party are those appropriators who said that it's okay to be on the terrorist watch list and go buy an assault weapon. That's the face of the Republican Party. If your litmus test is Israel, and Israel only, then I assume that when Ronald Reagan sold AWACS to the Saudis, which the Israelis said was an existential threat, or when George Bush canceled loan guarantees for Israel, or when Jim Baker said, I'm so frustrated with the Israelis, I'll give them my telephone number, they should call me when they're ready to make peace. If that's your litmus test, then that was a failure of Republican leaders.
I agree.
But if your litmus test is broader than Israel, if it's about the environment, if it's about education, if it's about Medicare and Social Security, if it's about college debt, if it's about all of those things, then our values are more reflective of Jewish voters and the overall Jewish community.
Let me jump in here and pose a question from the audience.
Go ahead.
Which will allow you to respond, Dan. And really, you've been very clear in your own feelings about the Republican candidate for president, the Republican nominee. Why don't more Republicans speak out against Trump the way you are? And why, how about supporters for Trump, as Congressman Israel was saying?
Wait, what's the last question? What about?
The comments that are being made by supporters of your nominee.
The stuff that, look, I have been on the receiving end of, every time I speak out against Trump, I'm on the receiving end of some extremely toxic, anti-Semitic rhetoric. So I've seen what Steve is describing firsthand. But it's loud, what you hear. It's intense, but it's narrow and fringy. It is not representative of the broad base of the Republican Party. So like I said, after November, when Trump goes, I am hopeful that Trumpism will be gone too, which includes that element that Steve and you were just referring to. Republican leaders, it is unfortunate to me to see how many Republican leaders have endorsed Trump, but at the same time, many of these Republican leaders have spoken out when Trump has said things like proposing a religious test for entering the country, when he has refused to repudiate or distance himself from David Duke on issue after issue. I mean, Steve wants to point to Steve King, who I agree, the things he has said and what he represents are atrocious. But Steve Israel knows that that's not what Paul Ryan thinks, the Speaker of the House. Paul Ryan is not Steve King. He knows that's not what Marco Rubio is. He knows that's not what even, Mitch McConnell. I mean, he knows that the leaders of the Republican Party don't, speak for Steve King or reflect or express Steve King. And they actually speak out against it. I mean, Paul Ryan worked as part of a bipartisan group on immigration reform. It didn't go well. I agree. It didn't work out. But my only point is he was out there. He was working on it. He's the Speaker of the House. You want to point to Steve King. He's not Steve King. But what I'm struck by today is we can point to this toxicity of rhetoric coming from the Democratic left as it relates to Israel, as it relates to the Jews, and it is anti-Semitism, because BDS, make no mistake about it, is anti-Semitism.
Of course it is.
And the fact that people are being put in positions of power at the senior levels of the party, maybe not in Congress, but of the party, who advocate for BDS, who call it a litmus test issue, the fact that it has become a major grassroots issue for the left, and the fact that so few leaders in the Democratic Party today are willing, as Steve has done courageously, but there are few like him, so few Democratic leaders are willing to speak up and speak out against it and confront it and beat it back. It's because they are intimidated, because they know this is the future of the Democratic Party.
Well, so Congressman, let me ask, following up on what Dan is saying, to what degree is the leadership of the Democratic Party going after this toxicity as he identifies it? You are others in the party leadership doing the same?
Very robustly. In fact, on anti-Semitism, this is not something that is relevant just to Democratic leaders, but I will say that the first ever conference at the United Nations on anti-Semitism came at the direction of President Barack Obama.
Toxicity within the party itself.
Let me give you some. We repudiate it. I have repudiated it. It is broadly repudiated. You can go down the list of Democratic leaders and talk about their specific criticism and rejection of that. But look, on the issue of, Paul Ryan not reflecting Steve King, Paul Ryan is the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Yes, it is true. He was on a platform committee that talked about the need for immigration. But he won't allow a vote on the bill. Why? He's afraid of his base. He's afraid of the toxicity in the Republican base. He may be a member of a committee that studied immigration, but as the Republican Speaker of the House, he won't allow us to vote on it. He is catering to a base that has an energy. Immigration is something I think we could pass immediately. The only thing standing in the way is Paul Ryan, who you say is not the face of the Republican Party because he's afraid of Steve King, who is.
No. I say he is the face of the Republican Party, and I'm saying that he wanted to push forward comprehensive immigration reform. Let me finish. I'm going to answer your question. Okay. All right. There's simply, as you know, there weren't the votes in the Republican-controlled House, unfortunately, to pass the bill.
You made my case.
But he was willing. You said the votes were there to get it passed. Why didn't he let it vote? I'm saying there weren't the votes. But look at
there weren't the votes in the Republican caucus.
Steve, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I know. So
we'll provide the votes. We'll fill in the blanks.
So Steve, you're calling on Paul Ryan to deal with some parliamentary procedural stuff. We can disagree.
Okay.
We can disagree on process stuff. But symbolic gestures matter. Why doesn't Hillary Clinton say to Bernie Sanders, it is unacceptable for you to put forward to the policy leadership of the Democratic Party individuals who believe that being for BDS and being critical of Israel is a litmus test issue for being a progressive? Why doesn't she say, I'm sorry, Senator Sanders, I'm sorry, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Barbara Lee cannot be on the... Why not?
Why? Paul Ryan...
No. I answered the question.
Why won't Paul Ryan say to Donald Trump,
he doesn't want to answer the question.
I rescind my endorsement because your statements are repugnant. Yeah. Your statements are not American. It is, folks, look,
Paul Ryan is doing more...
Get what you're doing.
No.
Let him finish.
This is the great debate on the platform committee. I know all America's tuned in.
Listen.
You know what the platform committee is,
Why
folks?
won't Hillary Clinton say these people are unacceptable? Why not?
Well, she may have. I don't know.
She hasn't.
She may have.
She hasn't. No, she has not. I'm telling you. So why?
Well, okay.
No. Look, but why? What is the concern? What is the concern?
If you're going to cast your vote on, well, not you, because you have condemned Donald Trump's statements, but you are one of two prominent Republicans that I know in the United States of America. In the United States of America, Bill Kristol. So that's two. So if that's our standard, okay.
We're growing. There's room to grow. It's a growing movement.
There's great growth opportunity.
Yeah, it's a real growth opportunity.
That's great.
It's a big tent.
So, you want Hillary Clinton to repudiate Senator Sanders for
not just repudiate. I want her to make it, turn it off.
Fine. I want your party to condemn Donald Trump for saying that he'll be a fair negotiator.
So do I.
but there's just two of you.
Yeah. but I'm just saying, the nominee of your party, it's not just repudiate, it's actually
let's not
say
talk
it's
about
not going to
nominee of
happen.
parties. Let's not talk
I think we pretty much covered
has
this.
said he
I
won't
agree.
negotiate with Israel.
Right. So you're now actually establishing moral equivalence between
No.
Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. That's a stat statement.
No, I'm establishing how absurd it is, actually.
Can I turn to another topic?
What's
It's
that?
related. It's related, believe me.
That?
I didn't hear what you say. What'd you say? I'm sorry.
From the audience, for Congressman Israel, what do you make of the famous New York Times article of a couple of weeks back about Deputy National Security Advisor Rhodes and his in the suggestions in that article that the White House misled the public about the Iran deal? And a second question for you, Congressman. What members of your party under age 45 would come here and make the same case that you're making?
Oh, under the age of 45?
In terms of...
Okay, sure. Well, first, on the issue of the New York Times, you know, I don't know who asked the question. I assume it's a friend of mine because they read the New York Times. There are people, you know, who say, you know, you can't trust anything the New York Times writes unless they write something that you agree with or you like. Then they make sense. Look, here I feel Dan's pain as being one who bucks his presidential nominee because I bucked my president. I voted against the Iran deal. I voted against the Iran deal not out of politics, but out of my DNA. And I said that to the president in a 25-minute phone conversation. It was always my dream. Stanley and Marion know this. It was my dream. And other Long Islanders who I may represent know. My dream, Dan, growing up on Long Island was to, well, play center field for the Mets, but that didn't work out. Be a novelist, which did. And to stand on the floor of the House that one day and get that little piece of paper that says, the president is on the phone for you. I realized what a nightmare that could be when I had to get on the phone with him and tell him why I was voting against the Iran deal. The reason I voted against the Iran deal, among many, but the principal reason I voted against the Iran deal was validated for me on the recent congressional delegation trip that I took to the Persian Gulf. We were in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Bahrain. We landed on the Harry S. Truman, a carrier, spent the day there, and 2 days in Israel. And what did we learn? That Iran is vastly accelerating its missile capabilities. That is the number one reason that I shared with the president, that deal was silent on Iran's missile capabilities. Now, having a nuclear bomb, it's bad. But if the bomb can only explode in your face, it's not such a problem for us. But if the bomb can be mounted on if the warhead can be mounted on a missile and reach Israel, that's unacceptable. And this deal was absolutely silent on Iran's missile capabilities. Iran is not exploiting the deal by testing its medium-range, short-range, and long-range missiles. It's not exploiting the deal because the deal didn't have one noun, one verb on those issues, which is why I voted against it. I had, to the question, more meetings with Ben Rhodes than I could count. And he had, obviously, some pretty strong positions and opinions on the deal. And at the end of the day, I disagreed with it. I didn't believe for a moment that he was misleading me. I asked him, where are we with missile delivery systems? His answer was, we can't get it into the deal. My response was, get it into the deal. His response was, can't be done. It wasn't done. I voted against the deal. I can't comment on any other member of Congress's experience with Ben Rhodes. Mine was pretty open, transparent, and my guess is that if I were to call him today, he probably wouldn't return the call.
Thank you. Dan, would you want to say a word about the Iran deal?
Look, I applaud Steve for voting against it. This issue also was a litmus test issue for the Democratic Party. It was considered unacceptable and illegitimate to be a Democrat who believed that Iran racing towards a nuclear weapons capability, which many like Steve believed, I think, would be made possible by this agreement, to hold that view, to have that concern was considered unacceptable. And when Steve came out courageously against the Iran deal, you should go read what some of the left-wing groups said about him. I mean, I actually, not that I normally read these things, but I, MoveOn.org, the Daily Kos. I mean, they called Steve and Chuck Schumer Warmongers, warmongers. There was a truck driving around New York City, organized, I think, by MoveOn.org, with an image of Chuck Schumer's face on it. You want to talk about vitriol? On the right, we can talk about vitriol on the left, with a circle around Chuck Schumer's head, bullseye through his head, called it the Schumermobile, going after him, calling him a warmonger, an Israel firster, for being against the Iran deal. Now, these are not fringe, truly fringe groups.
They are.
These are the groups that are populating the energy of the base in the Democratic Party. And I think over the next 10 years, the face of the Democratic Party and the grassroots of the Democratic Party will not be the 7% of House Democrats that had the courage to vote against the Iran deal. It will be the majority who voted with the president for the Iran deal.
So, Congressman, let me rephrase what Dan has said in a related question about the progressive base of the Democratic Party. As you know, AJC has been devoted for many years to creating and working in coalitions with sister ethnic, religious, national groups. We've played a role in helping organize Latino Jewish and Greek Jewish caucuses on the Hill and arranged Indian Jewish gatherings on and off the Hill, to name just 3 such communities. And we have a proud history of civil rights activism shoulder to shoulder with African American leaders and members of Congress. We do all this work as committed nonpartisans, but I have to ask you, representing the Democrats, do the old coalitions still work? Are Jews still part of, are they accepted as part of coalitions of minority groups? Are these coalitions, which in some ways define a significant fraction of the Democratic base, Jews' natural home any longer? Are Jews' causes progressive causes today?
Yes, yes, no, yes, yeah, no.
Oh, let me just work that out.
Look, no, the answer to your question is there is a vibrant and rich and dynamic coalition of Democrats with other groups in Congress and out of Congress. We actually formed in Congress a congressional task force on combating anti-Semitism. We bring in the Congressional Hispanic Caucus.
We played a significant role with you in that.
In fact, thank you for that, because the American Jewish Committee, ought to know, was instrumental in helping to form that. The Congressional Hispanic Caucus works with us. The Congressional Black Caucus works with us. And so that's one very specific and empirical example of where Democrats and Republicans work together, and where a prime and critical Jewish value, that of not being vilified because you are a Jew, is endorsed and embraced in a very proactive way by a broad range of different groups and people in the United States Congress, and they represent their districts. It's not just Congresswoman or Congressman Alcee Hastings in Florida, or Congressman Javier Becerra in California. They are reflections of their districts. So the good news is that there is that continued coalition building, and that coalition building is critically important, and will continue.
But if you travel to college campuses and you see what the progressive causes are they the progressive causes that identify with the Jewish students in those,
I know you're not suggesting
places?
that BDS is a Democratic movement, a Democratic Party movement, because the Democratic Party has explicitly condemned BDS. Democratic members of Congress have a working group against BDS, so I don't think that there is any alignment. I think it goes down to the issue that Dan raises, that if you have some, well, let's just call them nuts, some crazies on campus, to suggest that the Democratic Party energy is behind them is tantamount to suggesting that Republican Party energy is behind the use of concentration camp symbols to vilify American Jewish journalists. Let's stipulate you got your nuts, we have our nuts, but the mainstream is holding steady on Israel and on the broad range of other critical Jewish values.
Dan, thank you, Congressman. The Republican Party, as you have said early on in this debate, has focused a great deal of attention, energy on trying to reach out to Jewish voters, even though the yield from that campaign for many years has been not as great as you would like.
Small, yeah.
To what extent are you concerned that the appeal of the Republican Party has sought to broaden the Jewish community will be affected, in fact may to a degree be reversed by the tone that's been established by the Republican nominee this year? If I can say that in a nonpartisan way.
Yeah, I'm worried about the message that Trump sends to the Jewish community, sure, but it's part and parcel with my concern about what Donald Trump says to every part of this country and what he represents about America to the world. So it's not strictly I mean, sure, I don't think Jewish numbers will go up in the 2016 election with Donald Trump as our nominee. I hope there will be an independent candidate, a center-right independent candidate that Jewish voters can feel comfortable voting for, so they don't have to vote for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. But my real problem with Trump is not specifically how much damage he will do to the Republican Party's relationship with the Jewish community. It's much bigger than that. I mean, what Donald Trump represents is such a setback for this country that it far transcends any one religious or ethnic group. It's tragic, actually.
Thank you. Congressman, and I do want to take a moment to celebrate your 16 years of public service as a member of Congress.
Thank you.
And to tell you how much AJC and our country will miss you. But we will stay in touch, and I hope we'll invite you back in the future, and you'll accept our invitation.
I can intern for the American Jewish Committee if necessary.
We can work that out. But I want to ask you, does this highly unorthodox election raise questions about the meaning of parties at all? When you have a non-politician capturing the Republican Party's nomination and a contestant on the Democratic side winning a lot of primaries and caucuses, despite the fact that in more than 40 years of campaigning for office, he has never before run as a Democrat, could Jewish voters' loyalty to Democrats be declining? If it is indeed declining, because loyalty to parties in general is declining, could the answer to the question, which party is better for the Jews, be simply neither?
Well, I began by saying both. That's
Okay.
where I began. But this is a profoundly important question. I am, despite my vote on the Iran deal, I am a member of the elected Democratic leadership of the House of Representatives. And in that capacity, my job is to understand what's happening in the American electorate. Why do we have the environment we have now? And I think Dan alluded to this before and would agree with it. It's not just that political parties are declining as institutions, it's that all institutions are declining. We're witnessing an historic breakdown in faith for government as an institution. People think that George Bush's numbers plummeted as a result of the war in Iraq. No, it was our inability to rescue people from a roof in Katrina. So people have a breakdown in faith in government as an institution. They have a breakdown in faith in institutions as an institution, sports, the church, Wall Street. The economy's changing radically in front of their very eyes. When I do focus groups, people say, there used to be a Radio Shack in my neighborhood, it's gone. When I'd want to buy a book, I'd go to a bookstore, no such thing. When I wanted to get a ride, I would get a taxi. Now I have to do this thing called Uber. I don't even know what is Uber? What does that mean? They're seeing unprecedented threat around the world that they've never seen before, and they feel that democracy is broken. My party calls it income inequality. I disagree with that. It's democracy inequality. People feel that they just don't have a stake anymore in democracy. And when you have this convergence, people begin to reject all institutions. In fact, they want somebody who's going to stand up to those institutions. And that explains the environment that we are in. My argument to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle is that our country would be much better off if we could quit fighting on the 75% of issues that we will never agree on. I mean, Dan's a Republican for certain reasons. I'm a Democrat for certain reasons. We're just not going to agree. But there's 25% that we can agree on. And if we can focus on that 25%, like immigration reform, and get that passed, the country will be 100% better off. And people's faith in institutions and the political parties will be rekindled across the board.
Very good. Congressman, thank you. We're going to go to the closing pitches by our debaters. But before I do that, I just want to make it clear that when the title of this session is "Which Party is Better for the Jews?" I want to make sure it's understood that AJC believes that the question really is about which party is better for America, which party is better for humanity.
Correct.
We've got a lot of questions comments that came in from members of this audience about that, to make that very point. I just wanted to emphasize that. Dan Senor, your final 3 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you again for hosting Steve and me for a spirited debate. And despite things getting a little hot up here, I have tremendous respect for Steve, and I hope he stays in the fight. So, Steve,
thank you, Dan.
Whatever you do next.
Thank you.
I do want to come back to something he said earlier. If you look at this Pew poll, you look at all the polling, overwhelming majority of Democrats, particularly young Democrats today, millennials, identify themselves as progressives. And majorities of self-identified progressives, particularly young progressives, believe that comparisons of Israel to Nazi Germany, harsh criticism of Israel, support for BDS are perfectly legitimate issues. Don't take my word for it. These statements are out there. Look at the coalition group. Steve says some kookiness on campuses. It's not kookiness on campuses. It's actually the organized liberal coalition on campuses. The different groups on campuses are actually officially, not popping off, officially endorsing the BDS movement. And I believe, as many groups do across various Jewish across the Jewish organizational spectrum, believe that BDS is anti-Semitism. That energy among that young group of self-identified progressives who officially endorse BDS and officially endorse harsh, extremely harsh criticism of Israel is the future of the progressive movement. And I believe is the future of the Democratic Party, unless Democratic leaders step up and truly take it on. So it is my hope that a year from now, Donald Trump is not only not president, but a year from now when we gather at AJC, that Trumpism is, lobbed into the dustbin of history. And it is gone from the Republican Party. But it is also my hope that Democratic leaders will have taken on, not just issued statements, not just said some of the things Steve said, but used their power. Hillary Clinton is the presumptive nominee for her party's presidential nomination. She has the power to say it is unacceptable. I, as a presidential nominee, as the head of the party, I have the power to say, I'm sorry, but officials who support BDS and compare Israel to Nazi Germany cannot have a leadership position in shaping the policy agenda of our party. And I will say that to them, and I will say that to the grassroots progressives who are populating the base and the energy of our party. Thank you.
Dan, thank you. Congressman Israel, your final pitch.
Well, thank you very much. So, Dan, I'm putting you down as an undecided on the platform committee. And just for the record, the Democratic presumptive nominee for president, you just saw her on the video clip before we came on, said that the security of the state of Israel is non-negotiable. So she has said what she believes. But many of you are going to be up on Capitol Hill tomorrow, I understand, visiting congressional offices. Oh, today, this afternoon. So I hope, my chief of staff hates when I do this, but I hope you'll come to my office. I may not be there. But I want you to come to see what I have hanging on my walls, closest to my desk. I tell people, if you want to understand anything about anybody, don't do any research. Don't go to Wikipedia or the Congressional Involvement at the Congressional Directory. If you want to know about anybody, just show up in their office or their home and take a look at what they put on their walls. Because what we put on our walls are the most important things in our lives, right? Our priorities, our values, our challenges. On my walls closest to my desk are the original immigration certificates of two of my grandparents, Myron Kuznitsky and Ray Volovitz. And when I have a tough vote, I stare at those certificates. Their pictures are on those certificates. And I say, well, what should I do? What would give you nachas? Which many of my colleagues don't understand what it means. I look in the eyes in those pictures. I see eyes filled with the most unimaginable visions. Persecution, prosecution, poverty, pogroms. But I also see eyes wide open to the opportunity of the country that they came to. I don't think that when those pictures were taken, my grandparents ever would have thought that they'd be hanging on the walls of the United States Capitol, placed there by a grandson with the title Congressman, who could say to the President of the United States, respect you, disagree with you, we'll vote against you. But I have to believe that they must have believed that if that was possible anywhere in the world, it was possible in this country. Look, folks, they didn't come here to be good Democrats or good Republicans. They came here to be good Americans. They came here understanding that America would be good to them. And it is because that America welcomed immigrants and supported women and gave me the break I need through college affordability and protected the planet and built the middle class, it's because of those visions that my party works on every single day that I came to Congress. So not on behalf of me, not on behalf of President Obama or Nancy Pelosi or anybody else, but on behalf of my grandparents, on behalf of Myron Kuznitsky and Ray Volovitz. Thank you for giving me the privilege of serving for the past 16 years and fighting for Tikkun Olam. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good job. Good stuff.
Dan, Congressman Israel, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I was going to ask people to stay in their seats, so I think I'll just ask you to keep standing where you are. Do not leave this room. David Harris is coming up next. Thank you.